Well, hey there, reader friends. I'm Erica, and welcome to my channel. And I'm filming in the morning for a change of pace, so I have to drink coffee. Can you guess what my video is going to be about? Today I am going to be sharing with you my Fairytaleathon recommendations, and I have a problem because I love fairy tales, and I'm surrounded, you can't see it, but I am surrounded by books, and this isn't even all the books I'm going to talk about, because several of them I don't own. So let's go ahead and get started. Some quick basic information for you. If you're not aware, Fairytaleathon is going to be from August 13th to August 20th. There are going to be challenges, and it's hosted by myself, Becky at Coffee, Cocktail, and Books, Jordan at The Lost Reader, Sam at A Bear and a Bee Books, and Alex at Alex's Fiction Addiction. And I will leave a link to my announcement video down below, so if you want more information about how the readathon is going to go, feel free to check it out. Check out all my awesome co-hosts. I'm so ready. So as I was pulling these books, I was thinking, how can I discuss this in some sense of order? How can I make sense of the chaos of my enthusiasm? I have middle grade texts, YA texts, adult texts, and then I have like more formal fairy tale like anthologies. So here we go. Just a quick note, you can read original fairy tales for Fairytaleathon, or you can read retellings of classic fairy tales for Fairytaleathon. Either way, either one. We're not picky. If it's more fantasy-ish, that's okay. If it's more folktale-y, that's okay too. Pick what you like. Pick what you like, folks. I have 3 middle grade texts on my list of recommendations. 2 are original fairy tales, and 1 is a sort of... No, I think they're all originals. Yep, I lied. They're all original fairy tales. The first book I'd like to recommend is The Jumbies by Tracy Baptiste. This is a middle grade text, as I said earlier, and it follows our main heroine, a young girl named Corinne. What I really like about this book is it's rooted in Caribbean folklore and fairy tales, and it is very spooky. It is quite creepy. I listened to the audiobook when I read this last year, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I recommend it also if you're looking for something that's a bit of a faster read, that is spooky but not with a real sense of like intense tension. It's just really fun, and I loved Corinne, and I loved her friends, and I loved the camaraderie between her friends, and I also liked how, no spoilers, things kind of were revealed and came together. As often happens with the hero, like you realize something about their past, and then things make sense, and then they have this mission, and yeah. The second middle grade original fairy tale I have to recommend is When the Sea Turned to Silver by Grace Lin. Grace Lin is a prolific middle grade, and I think she's done some YA author, and her fairy tales are completely rooted in Chinese and like East Asian mythology, but this is an original tale. So it's not really a retelling, but I have read and been told by people that like know that like Chinese fairy tales better than I do that there's a lot of allusions to classic Chinese fairy tales. Maybe this is kind of just in between, and it's a little bit of retelling and a little bit of an original. The story follows Pen Mei, who is a young girl living with her grandmother, and her grandmother gets captured by the emperor. And her grandmother is captured because she is a storyteller and she knows all the great stories. And the emperor thinks that she knows where like this treasure is. That's like, I think it's like the light of the moon or something like that. I can't remember the specifics. But anyway, emperor comes and kidnaps grandma, destroys Pen Mei's village, and so Pen Mei has to go on this epic journey to not only save her grandma, but to also find this jewel thing that the emperor wants. And the way she finds them is by remembering and recalling the stories her grandmother has told her throughout her life, which happen to then have, you know, real world implications. One reason I recommend this book a lot to people who love fairy tales and are looking to kind of broaden their horizons in terms of what narratives they know is because Grace Lin does an amazing job of weaving the stories that Pen Mei's grandmother has told her into her like overall narrative of Pen Mei's like journey. So for example, here's one where she's intercut this story of the stonefish into the whole narrative. So you have like these little moments of just little fairy tales that are told to you, and then you as the reader connect them to what's going on in the larger narrative. I really enjoyed this book. I want to read her other books. There are several. This is the only one of hers that I've read, partly because it was up for all kinds of awards and it won several awards when it came out. So, yeah. And the final middle grade fairy tale that I want to recommend is The Two Princesses of Bamar by Gail Carson Levine. This is an original fairy tale that Gail wrote several years ago, back in I think the late 90s, and it follows two sisters, Addie and Meryl, and one sister is very, very, very like adventurous and gung-ho and gonna save the day and defying all these gender expectations. And the other sister, Addie, is much more reserved and kind of introverted and shy and really insecure in herself. And they have this dynamic, this wonderful dynamic of Meryl saving the day and Addie will be there to like welcome her home. Except Meryl gets sick, really sick, with like this great terrible plague that kills people. I think it's called the Gray Death. Honestly, can't remember exactly, but I think that's what it's called. And so that means that Addie has to go on a journey to find the cure to the Gray Death. And Gail Carson Levine is an expert at writing, you know, that epic journey fairy tale. Also, in general, I highly recommend Gail Carson Levine as an author to look into for this readathon because she does all the retellings, and all the original tales. She did Ella Enchanted, which is probably one of the like premier fairy tale retellings I ever read. I think I read it in 3rd grade when it first came out, and I was like, my mind was blown with the ability to like retell these tales in ways that spoke to me, and so it was very formative for me in terms of my reading taste, and I just highly recommend her books overall. Moving on to YA! So to begin, I am going to, support and reaffirm and like say my co-hosts are so smart because several of them suggested books that were on my list as well. The first series book that I am going to recommend with all the enthusiasm is Cinder, which is the first book in the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer, which is a science fiction retelling of classic fairy tales where the girls, they are awesome and they have agency and they don't play. One thing I really like about Cinder is that it ties together the frame of the classic Cinderella, Perrault's Cinderella that we know and love, but it puts so much agency within Cinder herself that isn't present in the original fairy tale as much, and also it just kind of expands the story to create more of a relationship between the prince and Cinder, so we don't have that insta-love ball thing. I also really like the original aspects that Meyer brings into this lunar world that she created. Like, it is epic. There's a lot going on, and I really recommend it. I've read Cinder and Scarlet, and then I started Cress, and because of things that happened in Scarlet, I was like, I don't want to finish Cress until winter comes out because I can't handle if everyone's going to stay in this kind of peril, and then I have to wait for the next book. And then I got distracted. So I might consider rereading these for Fairytaleathon. I'm still finalizing my TBR. I'll keep you posted. The next book I would like to wholeheartedly second as a recommendation is this one. Obviously, Court of Thorns and Roses. It's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast with Faye. And also, you know, a main character in Feyre who does not play, saves the day, is hardcore, and, you know, it's a little more adult. There's some schmexy times. If you're wanting more of a romancy type fairy tale, this is kind of what I'd recommend. I think it's one of the best Beauty and the Beast retellings I've read, which is saying something because I've read a lot of them. I think that it's a looser retelling, but I really like how Mass was able to take, again, the frame we know and put her own spin on it and create a heroine that has a little more agency and a little more of a personality for sure than the original classic tale. And the third book that I would like to recommend that was also recommended by my co-host is The Hazelwood by Melissa something. I don't remember and I don't have the book. I'm a booktuber, but sometimes I don't remember things. Now, I personally did not enjoy The Hazelwood as much as some other people did, but that's because I am not a big fan of the Alice in Wonderland story. It's not my favorite fairy tale. It's not my favorite book. It's just not my favorite. So I kind of went into that book already having like lowish expectations, but I did really enjoy Melissa. Is it Albright? I don't remember her last name, guys. It was an enjoyable retelling. I think she captured that sense of kind of the crazy of being thrown into Wonderland really well. I really also enjoyed her Hinterland world. I want to read that book of fairy tales. I want to read it. The next YA fairy tale that I'd like to recommend is one of my favorite retellings, and I loved it so much when I first read it because it retold a story that I wasn't as familiar with and that I also had my own kind of preconceived notions about, and it challenged those notions a lot. So the book is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh, which is a retelling of the Thousand and One Nights, Shahrazad's story, which basically is that she marries this king character and he kills his wife after their first night of marriage, and he's known to do this. And the way she prevents that from happening is by telling him a story every night but not ending it, so he has to let her live so he can find out what happens at the end of the story. So that's clever. I really love how Renee was able to tie in aspects of Middle Eastern culture and also just create a really dynamic story in a setting that honestly doesn't get a lot of attention and a lot of notice and a lot of just respect. She just did a great job. And also, how that is a difficult premise to make, into a good relationship. The guy kills his wives. He kills his wives. How are you going to redeem that character? Well, for me, she did. So you should check it out and see if it works for you too. Now we get to go in to one of my favorite fairy tale authors. Part of it is because she does creepy, dark, spooky fae that have no sense of morals and then weirdly do so well. And I can't contain my excitement. I just love Holly Black so much. I love this book. I love The Cruel Prince. I love everything about this book. I love the fact that I never am surprised by twists, and the twist at the end of this book, I literally went, whoa, what is happening? What is happening? People that have access to Arcs of Wicked King, I want to I'm not going to say it because, anybody could watch this, but I am extremely jealous. Needless to say, I am so jealous. I don't even know how to make a summary of this. I'm just so in love with it. But basically, it follows a teenage girl named Jude, who is captured as a young kid by the Fae and taken into their world, and she's raised by them, but she doesn't forget that they did her wrong. Boy, she doesn't forget that they did her wrong. There's also a Fae prince named Carden, who I have lots of feelings about. I just have lots of feelings, and I would love if you read this book and we can share our feelings and discuss together. This is probably going to be my favorite book of 2018, guys. To be honest, I don't know what's going to top this for me. It just did everything I love. It took us into a separate world. It took us into the woods. It had a kind of romantic plotline, but not really. And it also didn't shy away from having characters that did things that were really messed up. And yet you still kind of like them, but they do things that are messed up, and then you just question your own sense of morality. I need the next book now. Another book by Holly Black that has super duper kind of creepy fae and this sense of otherness to it that I love so much is The Darkest Part of the Forest. There are two human characters in this story that are kind of the two protagonists. One is Hazel and the other is her brother Ben. And in the world they live in, there is a fae prince who is in a coffin, asleep, similar to Snow White, and he wakes up. And that's the beginning. One thing I really like about The Darkest Part of the Forest is there are a lot of ways that you could read it in terms of where the romance is. I like that there's this aspect of fluid sexuality that happens. It's very, very subtle, but there are definite hints of the fact that certain characters could be bisexual, or certain characters could be gay, and that it's not treated as this kind of taboo thing. And I really love I love Holly Black's writing. I love the creepy worlds she creates. I just love her writing so much. Time for more coffee, guys. Another kind of older author in terms of when she was publishing books that does amazing fairy tale retellings is Robin McKinley. Her Beauty, which is the title of her first Beauty and the Beast retelling, was again one of the formative retellings of my reading experience. Her retellings tend to follow the original fairy tale very, very closely. So if you're wanting one that's really just a fleshing out of an original fairy tale, I would recommend Robin McKinley, because she doesn't stray too much from the originals in terms of characterization and what happens, but it provides just more. She also has some original fairy tales, which I have not read yet, but I have heard amazing things, especially about The Hero and the Crown, which won, what did it win? Did it win the Newbery? It won some like very prestigious award, and I just love her writing. It makes me feel happy. It makes me feel like I'm kind of feeling nostalgic for the fairy tales I grew up loving, and then just so excited because there's so much more being explained. Okay, we're gonna move on to adult fairy tales, adult books that are fairy tales and fairy tale tellings, and I am recharged. Well, I don't care, I'm just excited. The first book I want to recommend in terms of adult length tales, like adult book fairy tales, is The Princess Bride by William Goldman. If you watch the movie, I recommend reading the book. The narrator is kind of, I think, Fred Savage's character. He's the grandson, and he is going to like research and find the original fairy tale that his grandfather read to him when he was young, and he finds out that that fairy tale is long and esoteric and dense and boring. It's kind of poking fun at Tolkien, I feel, a little bit, because it like talks about how there are pages and pages of just descriptions of running up and down hills and like what's happening. I just recommend this if you love the movie. It's a fun read. It's good if you're wanting more of a lighthearted kind of fairy tale that's kind of also poking fun at fairy tales and at like the epic stories we tell. So the next book I'm going to talk about is controversial. People love it or they hate it. One of the booktubers I follow hates it with a vehement passion, which I respect and I understand, but I enjoyed it. It gets put in YA, but I think it is much more of an adult type text in terms of just the way it's written and its density. And that book is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is rooted in kind of Eastern, I don't know, Czechoslovakian, Russian, like that whole Eastern Bloc folklore. It follows our main character, Agnieszka, who lives in a village near the woods, and these woods are known to be dangerous, and there is a wizard known as the Dragon who keeps the woods at bay, and the price the village pays is that they give him a girl. He takes a girl and keeps her for a period of time, I don't remember exactly how long, and then gives her back, but she has been changed so much that she can't stay in the village and she has to leave. So I kind of like the idea that he doesn't actually like kill her or anything, but there's this real mystery about what happens to the girls that are taken by him. This book is slower. I would recommend it if you are looking for a more chewy read, one that's very dense in its descriptions, and one that is more character driven than plot driven. There's a very interesting plot. There's also a very good, well-developed political plot. But this really comes down to the characters, and it comes down to this like world that Novik is creating, and it comes down to her descriptions of the forest and all the nasties. If you like that, like really good description of creepy forests, this is good. This is good. The next adult book I would like to recommend is a great read alike if you have read Uprooted and liked it, and that is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, which I enjoyed more than Uprooted, to be honest with you. I think that Arden did a much better job at moving her story along, and I also think that she didn't kind of fall into the trap of loving her own writing so much that she kind of loses her readers. I also just enjoy that it talks about cold and winter. Winter is my favorite season, and so like it's very nice for me when I can read books that take place in like cold climates where winter itself is like an active character, and I just loved that. I loved that. The Bear and the Nightingale follows Vasilisa, I'm not sure how to say it, Vasya. It starts off with her like birth, but then throughout the novel goes until she's in her like mid to late teens. Of marriageable age, I guess. And Vasilisa has these powers. She's kind of known as a witch, and the way that this works is that she sees and can speak to all the various spirits and sprites that are in the pagan village where she lives. One thing that's really interesting about this story is that it does discuss this idea of the the paganism and wood sprites and myths and fae and whatever you call it, and the old like belief system, and then the conflict that happens when Christianity comes into play and is pushing those things out. And then in this story, the repercussions of not believing in the wood sprites that have kept the bad things at bay and what that means. There's also a really cool, like, I'm hoping when I read on it develops into a romance, because you know I love romances, but there's a really interesting dynamic between Vasya and the lord who is kind of the king, I guess, of the forest. I don't remember his exact name, but he is, you don't mess with him. You don't mess with him when you see him. And he claims her as a young girl as his. And her father works out a deal where he like has to wait until she's of age to get her. That dynamic between the two of them is really interesting. And the threat that's coming is called Winter or Night or the Bear. And it is, he's the baddie. He's bad news, he's bad news, and because people aren't believing in the wood sprites, they're losing their power, and Vasya needs to save the day, and it's just a great fairy tale, and I've spent way too long talking about it, but I loved it so much, and yeah, highly recommend if you like character-driven, descriptive, wintry type fairy tales that are more slow in terms of their plot, but have really interesting, like, multiple plot lines kind of going on in terms of political and fairy tale and family. It's all there in this book. It's all there in this book. And the final adult fairy tale that I would like to recommend to you is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. Mainly because I looked at my books and I was like, there are not very many dude writers, male writers in this collection, so let's add some. I personally like the film more than the book, but I did enjoy the way that, again, kind of tongue-in-cheek, Gaiman plays with this idea of fairy tale, this idea of, you know, damsel in distress, and the way that he brought in the, like, plot markers we know and love, but put his own spin on it. He has such a distinctive writing style that personally is not my favorite to read, but I love it for the fact that it is so uniquely his, and he's developed it so well, and he knows how to use his craft. Like, that's impressive. This is also great if you're looking for a quicker, more lighthearted read. Because, you know, sometimes you want fairy tales that aren't so intense. Sometimes you want ones that just make you feel safe and that you can just enjoy. Now, for those of you who are my friends that really like reading the original tellings, that really like reading what started it all, I have a couple of suggestions. First of all, if you're looking for kind of the thing that in Western culture and the Western literature world started it all, you can't really go wrong if you start off with the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. Jack Zipes, who is the person who compiled and translated this version of Grimm's, you can't go wrong with his story. You can't go wrong with his translations. I also really like that Zipes does a good job of maintaining the kind of tone and language of the original tales, but he doesn't make it so old and clunky that you aren't interested. Now, if you want something that's more readable and not as concerned with keeping the tone and the mood of the originals and the language of the Grimms intact, I would recommend this book, Philip Pullman's Fairy Tales from the Brothers Grimm, which is really Philip Pullman retelling the fairy tales in the same way, in that they aren't long, it's just the same length, and he also cites like which versions he used, but he makes them into like a story you could read, you know, I wouldn't say to kids, because Grimm's is not necessarily what you want to read to young children, but he makes it more just accessible, and I enjoyed this collection a lot. Kind of moving in a different direction, one of my favorite films of all time from childhood is the like 1990s version of A Little Princess. I just love the music, the tone, the acting. I just love that film so much. If you've seen that film, the story that Sarah tells from India is actually based on an epic story that is one of India's like most well-known stories. It's amazing, and that is the Ramayana. The Ramayana follows various characters. The story of Rama that Sarah tells is in here, as well as many others. This is William Buck's version, and it is accessible, but it is more scholarly. When I read this for a class in college, our professor kind of divided it up so you could follow one of the main stories and not worry about some of the other stories. So if you're curious, if you're not sure where to start, I recommend doing some research. I'll do some research too. Feel free to reach out about how to go about reading this if it's completely new to you and you don't want to be confused or thrown out of like the story because you don't quite understand what's going on. But it is extremely enjoyable and it's very different, and it's really refreshing for me when I get to read stories that are so different and that I don't know what's going to happen and that I just don't know. It's just completely different tone, mood, culture, references I don't get that then I get to look up and I'm opened up. This is just, I really enjoyed this story and I really highly recommend it if you're wanting something that's completely different, has the same themes of, you know, love and going on a journey and the hero, but also is just completely different in terms of culture. More coffee. And the final book I would like to suggest to you is one that I'm pretty sure is going to be on my TBR, and that is Don't Bet on the Prince, Contemporary Feminist Fairy Tales in North America and England by Jack Zipes. These are new fairy tales. They're recent fairy tales, and they're ones where the ladies save the day, and they don't stick around waiting for a prince. Jack Zipes compiled the stories, and one thing I really like about this edition is he of course tells who wrote the story, and it's quite helpful, like not helpful, but encouraging to me that so many of them are women, because let's be honest, the Grimms were dudes, Perrault was a Jew, Madame was a female in France. She's where we got Beauty and the Beast. I really like this book because it's focused so strongly on female characters and women claiming, like, taking back fairy tales and saying, hey, we need to have stories where the women are not the, like, downtrodden, slave-like characters that they tend to be in the classic fairy tales. It is kind of a more obscure text, so you may need to buy it or go, if you're near, like, a university or a college library, they might have a copy. Some of the stories in it, you could find other places as well. Basically, if you're really curious and you're struggling to find it, I'd go reach out to your local librarian and ask them to help you find it, because it's really good, guys, and I'm actually pretty excited. If it does end up being on my final TBR, I'm pretty excited. The video won't be this long, but my raw footage is 43 minutes and 56 seconds and counting. This is the longest video I've ever filmed. And this isn't even all the fairy tales I've read and the retellings I've read, and like I probably have at least 10 more that I could have talked about. But these are the ones that I really love, and they're also the ones that I think would work really well for our challenges. And I tried to pick a wide range of things, so if there's at least one that maybe appeals to you. But if you do have any questions, or if you're still struggling, please reach out to myself or my co-host. We are here to help you find the perfect fairy tale for you. And I'm just going to end it there. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to. And bye, guys. I forgot to say, I have 2 books here that I haven't read yet that are also in consideration for my TBR that I would like to recommend because I've heard fantastic things. And the first is The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo, which are folktales and fairy tales from her Grishaverse. I've heard amazing things. It's a beautiful book. It's got illustration. It's got illuminations. And it was published last year, I think it was? Yes, 2017. So it would count for that, like, you know, modern myth challenge as well. And the second book I would like to recommend that I'm really excited to read and just haven't gotten around yet, but I've heard amazing things from every single person I've talked to who has read it, is Arusha and the End of Time, which follows Aru, who is a middle schooler whose mother works at a museum of Indian culture and history, and she lies a bit, and so she gets caught in a lie, and her friends challenge her to like light a lamp, and things happen, and it's rooted in Indian mythology and folklore, and I want to read it so badly. Okay, bye guys!